Messy compromise or promise fulfilled? These are just two of the questions Canadian vapers are struggling with following the Liberal government's release of its new federal vaping regulations. The legislation known as Bill S5 is currently winding its way through the Senate and is expected to become law by mid-next year. Bill S5 represents the first ever attempt to regulate vapor products at the national level. It reflects both the priorities of Health Canada to protect youth from tobacco use and recommendations from the HESA report to develop a new harm reduction framework for e-cigarettes. The wrangling over the new regulations takes place amidst a contentious battle between world-leading public health officials over risks versus benefits of vaping. The U.S. Surgeon General's warning this week that vaping poses major risks for young people, the ever-present threat of big tobacco gaining new ground, and the World Health Organization's push to ban e-cigarettes. To say that Canadian legislators need to thread the needle with Bill S5, well, is an understatement. Senate Bill S5 is comprehensive legislation that amends the Tobacco Act, creating the new Tobacco and Vaping Products Act. It also amends the Non-Smokers Health Act, the Consumer Product Safety Act, and the Food and Drugs Act, which taken together legalizes vaping in Canada. Pivotal to making vaping products legal is making nicotine legal, and Bill S5 does just that. The new legislation removes vaping products with nicotine from the scope of the Food and Drugs Act, a momentous legislative move. In addition, Bill S5 also clearly defines vaping products as a consumer product, placing it under the scope of the Consumer Product Safety Act. The reclassifications mean consumer vaping products in Canada would be no less accessible than conventional tobacco products. Both these changes, however, only apply to vaping products not marketed for therapeutic purpose. Thus, there would be two classifications, the therapeutic and the consumer product, and for the latter, no health claims could be made. Legal vaping products containing nicotine, classified as a consumer product and exempt from the onerous requirements of drug market authorization, is a huge win for the vaping industry in Canada. But often with wins come compromise, and such may be the case around the highly sensitive and critically important issue of flavors. A wide diversity of e-juice flavors available in thousands of combinations across hundreds of different brands is recognized as a determining factor in a successful migration from smoking to vaping. Without variety and choice, many smokers are unable to make the switch. But flavors adults find enticing may also be to kids, and any attempt to regulate vaping usually presents a threat to flavors. Bill S5 carefully handles the issue by limiting the appeal of certain flavor categories to young people. Under the federal regulations, e-juice flavors are not banned. However, restrictions would be in place on flavors in the confectionery, dessert, cannabis, soft and energy drink categories. Manufacturers could still produce e-juice and retailers could still sell products with flavors from these categories, but they would be prohibited from communicating these flavors in any way via promotion and packaging through illustration, indication, or brand. Joining us today is Marc Kealey from K&A Consulting, the Canadian Vaping Association's powerhouse public policy and government relations firm. Marc, thanks for coming back on the show. We've just touched on the top headlines, but there's so much more to dive into. First, I'd like your overall reaction to the proposed regulations. Are they good news or are they bad news for vaping?
Well, look, Brent, I appreciate your introduction for sure. And frankly, we've been working not only with the federal government since we began this whole process in 2014, but we've also been working with every province across Canada on this. It's been a mind-numbing siege. But let me tell you, it could have been a heck of a lot worse. And so I'm not going to say that we got everything we wanted out of Health Canada for these regulations and this legislation.
Marc, you said worse. Could vaping have been banned in Canada?
Every country in the world right now is challenged with what they do on regulating this, for all intents and purposes, new industry. So if you look at what happened at the Conference of the Parties in India just a couple of weeks ago, there were conventions that were passed by 180 countries. The majority of them, excluding Canada, chose to ban or to do away or dispense with this industry. Now, I like to say we had some, and I think CVA should take some credit with the work that we had done with Health Canada by saying to them, if you go down the path of banning this, you're going to drive it underground. And if you drive it underground, you're going to be in a heck of a difficult spot. So, I think putting it out in the open, we like to use the phrase, we're normalizing the activity. It's a less harmful approach than smoking cigarettes for sure, and Health Canada certainly recognized that. So we're quite pleased that this first attempt at this legislation and these regulations is certainly going to do that.
So Marc, you make it sound like the vaping industry in Canada dodged a bullet with the WHO and COP7.
Canada could have said, yeah, we'll buy into that, but they didn't. And I got to give the minister some credit, and I got to give, frankly, Health Canada a heck of a lot of credit, because they could have bought into this hook, line, and sinker and said we're gonna do this, but they realized that there is a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes, and perhaps this is it.
Right.
I got to tell you too, Brent, one of the things that we've been working very hard, and I got to say the Canadian Vaping Association, on behalf of its members, but more importantly for the industry, has been working very hard with Health Canada. There's been a lot of discussion, and I was at a meeting directly with the Minister of Health where she punched me in the arm and said, "You're on my radar screen." So that tells me that she could have walked away, because this business of people governing people, I can tell pretty quickly whether a politician is going to be dissing me or making sure that I'm part of a process, and it certainly seemed to me like we're a part of the process.
Speaking of process, a note to our viewers, please stay tuned for part 2 of our discussion when Marc and I dive into some of the specifics like flavors and manufacturing. Marc, in terms of the legislative process, I know many of our viewers are concerned about the language in Bill S5 as it currently stands right now in the Senate. Is this it, or could there be changes?
No, this is not it. The process is they'll do first reading, there'll be some debate. Then it'll go to second reading, and there'll be more debate, and then they will refer it to a committee. Once they do that, they'll go back and do what they call clause by clause, and then they will refer it to the House of Commons as a Senate bill to be proclaimed, or they'll do the same thing and seek some kind of public consultation. Regardless of all that process, which is going to take a very protracted period of time, we are going, as the Canadian Vaping Association and advocates for vaping in this country, we're going to be very much involved in that process as witnesses to committees, and to put draft statements forward to make sure that they understand very clearly what our concerns are and what changes or amendments we might want to offer.
But Marc, even with all of the process you just described, couldn't the government just ignore all the evidence and leave the legislation pretty much as it's written today?
It will never end up like it's first written. It just can't. There are too many people in this country who are seeking to be witnesses to the committee hearings that will be put on at the House of Commons.
Marc, last question for part 1 of our discussion. What do you have to say to our viewers who may be concerned that in the process the CVA could get pushed around by the government?
We're not gonna be scaredy cats, Brent. We're not gonna pussyfoot around. This is something that people who want to vape are taking this very seriously. And frankly, it's not because they want to look cool or they think they look cool. It's because they don't want to smoke cigarettes anymore.
Well, that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please like us on Facebook and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.